I grew up in a small town, Central California, and the movie theaters there didn't show, much beyond Bridge on the River Kwai and The Blob. So I didn't really experience foreign films until I found my way into film school. And at that point is when I was actually exposed to Kurosawa. And a friend of mine, John Milius, actually was a huge fan of Kurosawa's. And so whenever the film was showing, he'd say, "Oh, you got to come and see this. You got to come and see this." And after the first one, the first one I saw was Seven Samurai, and after that I was completely hooked.
Welcome, Masters and Padawans, to episode 585 of Full of Sith. It's me, Bryan Young, bringing you another installment of Full of Sith, live from Japan. This is something I had a few people ask me for. Actually, I talked to a lot of people. We had to turn away so many folks in Japan from my panel about Akira Kurosawa and his influence on Star Wars. The university stage was pretty small, and the line was huge, and they had to turn away a ton of people from being able to go in, and people were waiting, and even when people were leaving, a couple people had to leave midway. Immediately their seats would fill in again because there were still people trying to get in even halfway through. So I was able to record it and, have the audio for it, and am really happy to be able to present it. And, I told people, we'd have that audio and they'd be able to listen to it. They don't have the slides to accompany it with the podcast, but, if you email me, I'd be happy to share those slides with you. If you want to email me through my website, swankmotron.com, send me a message through there, and I would be happy to send you the slides. But without further ado, here's the presentation about Kurosawa and Star Wars, and straight from Star Wars Celebration Japan 2025. I don't think they could fit anyone else in this room, so we'll just start a few minutes early if that's okay with everybody else. Welcome, thank you all for waiting in line and getting in here. I know there's plenty of other things to do here at Celebration, including waiting in other lines. How's everybody's celebration going so far, though? You're enjoying it? It's hard to believe today's the last day already. I know, right? It feels like it shouldn't be over yet. This is one of the shortest celebrations I've ever been to. How many people, this is your first celebration? How many people have been to more than 3 celebrations? More than 5? More than 10? More than 12? Okay, more than 13. Okay, I'm at 13. How many have you been to?
All of them except for Anaheim, the last Anaheim for COVID, and London.
Okay, so you've got me beat by 1. Okay, that's cool. This is my 13th, so this is your 14th?
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, great. So, this is the Kurosawa and Star Wars panel. Adam Christopher, the Star Wars author, was going to do this with me, but he had to leave town yesterday, unfortunately, so you're just stuck with just me, so I'm sorry. A little bit about me, in case you don't know me. I'm an author. I like to say I'm a professional Star Wars nerd. I've written for StarWars.com since 2008 or so. I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of articles in Star Wars Insider.
If you collect Topps Star Wars trading cards, I write most of those. I cover Star Wars for Slash Film and a whole bunch of other websites, and I do a whole bunch of other Star Wars stuff. I write back matter in a whole bunch of the Marvel comics and a whole bunch of other Star Wars stuff. For StarWars.com, one of my favorite things was the Cinema Behind Star Wars column for a long time. And I really love, I teach screenwriting actually at the University of Utah, and have dabbled in filmmaking, and I'm actually also an author and filmmaker, and do some other stuff there. I write books in the Battletech universe and stuff. And I really love tracing the influences of other things, like watching a movie and seeing what came before it and where those things were. And the first time I got to meet George Lucas, it was Kurosawa that we talked about, and it was, I think we talked about that. I was a little like, holy crap, I'm talking to George Lucas. I was a little like that when you see me talking to Carrie Fisher. That was a totally different story. Ask me about that sometime. So we're going to talk about Kurosawa and George Lucas, though, and his influence, Kurosawa's influence specifically on Star Wars, a little bit about Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa was an acclaimed filmmaker here in Japan. He was born in 1910 and passed away in 1998. He directed 30 feature films. He was very influenced by Western filmmakers, but his cinema really maintained that Japanese flavor and culture, but he had a way, he was the first really breakout Japanese film director that broke out into Western culture, and I think it was because he straddled the influences that he had from Westerns like John Ford, but he also maintained that distinct Japanese flavor and personality that really started introducing Japanese cinema to American audiences and Hollywood. And he was just a fantastic filmmaker generally. He really understood the language of cinema, and there were things that he did that not a lot of other filmmakers did. When he was preparing a film, he would do full-size paintings or even small paintings sort of as storyboards. Storyboards weren't something a lot of filmmakers did, but he would do these hand-painted storyboards of his movies. And George Lucas was sort of notorious for doing storyboards and moving through there. So there was some of that same DNA in his films. But George Lucas didn't really have a lot of access to foreign films growing up. He said that in a small town in Northern California, the movie theaters there didn't show much more than Bridge on the River Kwai and The Blob, so he didn't really experience foreign films until he found his way into film school. And at that point, then he was exposed to Kurosawa. A friend of mine, he says, John Milius, was actually a huge fan of Kurosawa's, so whenever a film was showing, he'd say, "Oh, you gotta come see this." The first one I saw was Seven Samurai, and then after that I was completely hooked. I said, this is really good. And you can kind of chart Lucas's descent into Kurosawa fandom from there. And so we'll start with he said, we'll start with Hidden Fortress. And Lucas, about Hidden Fortress, said Seven Samurai is really my favorite, then maybe Yojimbo, then maybe Ikiru, then maybe after that it's the Hidden Fortress. It's not at the top of my list, but I was impressed and I liked it. But the Hidden Fortress is the one that gets the most credit for inspiring Star Wars. And there's a lot of reasons for that. My first exposure actually to Kurosawa was, I was maybe 10 years old, and I was in a library. I was in my public library, and there was a videotape, a two cassette tape set of Hidden Fortress, and blazed on the top was the film that inspired Star Wars. And I was like, I have no idea what this is, but I'm renting it now. And I brought home Hidden Fortress, and I was like, that was amazing. I don't know how it inspired Star Wars, but I loved it. So, I mean, putting that on the video cassette was enough for a 10-year-old to go like, black and white samurai films are pretty great. Which was enough of a marketing tactic for the distributor in 1990 that it was a pretty smart ploy. But Hidden Fortress, part of the reason that it kind of gets the reputation it does, if you want to look into it a little deeper, if you get J.W. Rinsler's Making of Star Wars book, you can actually read the original treatment of Star Wars that George Lucas wrote in 1974, and you can actually compare it to the original synopsis, like the back cover copy, essentially, of Hidden Fortress. And the original 1974 treatment of Star Wars is the exact same, but with all of the Japanese names scratched out and like really weird Star Wars names written in. So George Lucas was really just like, how could I take this and make it Flash Gordon? So that was kind of his initial jumping off point. And he scrapped those drafts over and over again, and it morphed into something completely different, but Hidden Fortress was really his spiritual sort of jumping off point to start with. And he'll tell you that Hidden Fortress was that jumping off point, but the only thing he really took going into A New Hope was the idea of what he calls the worm's eye view. And Hidden Fortress really takes the point of view of these two characters, these two peasants that are caught in the middle of this war, and they're just trying to get home, but these two warring provinces are not allowing travel between them. And so they come up with this idea that they're going to go travel to a neighboring province that is not at war with either of the two provinces, and then just sort of go around the conflict. But you'll notice if you watch Hidden Fortress and A New Hope back to back, the story's told very much from their point of view, the same way A New Hope is told from R2 and 3PO's point of view. And they're in the estimation of the filmmakers, the lowliest characters in the film. And you'll also notice that so much of the dialogue of these two peasants and R2 and 3PO is very much the same. A lot of the insults that 3PO lobs at R2, and a lot of the insults that R2, we're to infer that R2 lobs at 3PO, come right out of the mouths of these two peasants in Hidden Fortress. And you can watch, and it is one for one exactly the same. Rian Johnson talked a little bit about this too when he talked about using Rose and Finn as POV characters. Like Rose is a mechanic, sort of that lowliest character on the totem pole as far as position in the Resistance in The Last Jedi, and making that an interesting choice. Not that she was like a peasant or one of the droids, but she was sort of like the least in command as far as the unit. You've got Rey and Leia, and you've got Poe and Holdo and Finn, and Rose has sort of like the least command ability of everyone there on the chain. To be honest, Hidden Fortress actually has the most story in common with Phantom Menace, and George Lucas kind of went back to the Hidden Fortress for that well. Ultimately, Hidden Fortress is about a General Makabe, played by Toshiro Mifune, who is trying to get this deposed princess across these enemy lines as well. And she has a very faithful double of a handmaiden who he is trying to get across these enemy lines as well. Does that sound familiar at all? So when people are like, oh, A New Hope is based on Hidden Fortress, and then you look at the storylines beat for beat, it's actually pretty much more Phantom Menace than it is A New Hope. And so when you see the themes of actually like people leading different lives and people having these masks that they wear, I think that's something that's very inherent in a lot of Kurosawa's work. When you look at a lot of Kurosawa's work from beginning to end, people wearing different masks and them showing people different versions of themselves or having to step into different roles. That's something that's very common in his work. And it's something that George Lucas uses a lot in Star Wars. Whether that's characters physically taking on masks like Darth Vader, whether that's the handmaidens taking on those different roles, whether that's the dehumanization of stormtroopers putting masks on, things like that. You see those themes across Kurosawa's work that George Lucas really picks up on, whether that's unconsciously or not, that become themes through Lucas's work as well. And Hidden Fortress is just one part of that. The other thing that you see in Hidden Fortress that Kurosawa does just sort of as a film technique is you'll notice that Kurosawa shoots action sequences with extremely long lenses from a very long distance away. So what that does is, if you know anything about photography, if you shoot, or even with your phone, right? If you zoom in and then try to track something, you know how it takes a long, like it zooms by, like it takes a really steady hand to track something if you zoom in too far. Well, in Kurosawa's chase sequences in Hidden Fortress, he's very far away. And when you're shooting in black and white like this, they used to joke that Kurosawa took as much lighting to light a day scene as it took most film directors to light a night scene. Because he was using such long lenses to shoot from so far away, to get an exposure, he would have to use that much light even during the day. But he was shooting from so far away because he wanted to get that feeling of the background racing past you, so that it would create this kinetic energy in the shots, so that when Makabe is racing by on a horse, the background is just so not in focus because he's tracking exactly Makabe on the horse. And so that's something George Lucas was replicating in the trench run with the way the background moves in the trench run with the X-Wings. And that was sort of the film technique he was replicating with ILM, with the way the miniatures were moving. And it was something he was recreating that feeling based on Hidden Fortress, which is really interesting, I think. He also pulled a lot of shot choices straight from Hidden Fortress. This is a pair of shot choices from Revenge of the Sith, and he replaced the peasants with Anakin and Padme, with Makabe sort of leering over them, but does anybody think that's unintentional? And George Lucas, if anybody's ever met him or talked to him at length, like, the man is just a computer reference library of film and film shots. And Kurosawa films are definitely just locked in his head at all times. And it's something that I talked to Dave Filoni once, and he said, if you want to talk to George Lucas about getting something done or presenting a new idea, so much of it is being able to talk in his language, to speak his language, and his language is movies. His language is other movies. His language is classic cinema. His language is that shot from that movie. His language is this story beat from that picture, and things like that. So that when you want to get those ideas across, this is how he communicates. And so it would be no great stretch for me to think that on the set for this day, when he's talking to his cinematographer, David Tattersall, I'd really like this setup to look like, Toshiro Mifune looking down on the peasants in Hidden Fortress, especially since it's so strikingly similar. It's to the point where it doesn't feel like a mistake or an accident. Another major influence Hidden Fortress had on Star Wars is that, how many of you knew that Toshiro Mifune was almost cast as Obi-Wan Kenobi? he was offered the role, and he had turned it down. And part of the reason he turned it down was because they'd showed him some of the designs and the idea of the story, and he was worried and concerned that George Lucas would be sort of disrespecting, potentially, Japanese samurai culture with sort of the visuals of the Jedi and what that would be like, with just another B sci-fi movie. Because you got to think at the time in the 70s, like, what would it be like? You know, this could have been like Ed Wood's Bride of the Atom, right? Like, and Toshiro Mifune going like, I don't know, am I going to do this really crappy sci-fi movie that's going to go nowhere, and it's going to play at a drive-in, and I'm going to make a mockery of, you know, this samurai heritage? I think I'll pass. We could have had a very different Star Wars had Toshiro Mifune agreed to do it. But Toshiro Mifune was someone that George Lucas had wanted to work with, and Steven Spielberg did as well. And that was why we ended up getting Toshiro Mifune in Steven Spielberg's 1941, actually, which is probably, I don't know, Mifune probably regretted that more than... I would regret being in 1941 maybe less than regretting turning down Star Wars. I don't know. Yeah, but... So then we'll move to Seven Samurai. Lucas said that Seven Samurai made an extraordinary impact on him. I'd never seen anything that powerful or cinematographic. The emotions were so strong that it didn't matter that I didn't understand the culture or the traditions. From that moment on, Kurosawa's films have served as one of my strongest sources of creative inspiration. You'll notice some of the character quirks. Takashi Shimura's character, Kanbei Shimada, served from the very beginning as an inspiration for Yoda. And you'll notice that he has these moments, particularly in Revenge of the Sith, when they could animate it well enough, where he could be, you know, sort of rubbing his head like Kanbei does so much through the movie. And his attitude is very much taken from that. And you'll notice that Seven Samurai comes up so often in the animated series. They'll do the Seven Samurai remakes, right? Like in the Clone Wars, which was very much driven by George going like, we're gonna do a Seven Samurai, and it's gonna be a whole bunch of bounty hunters saving this town from Hondo coming to take over. And Ahsoka and Anakin are gonna be the last two samurai that show up, right? Seven Samurai, notably for anyone not familiar with Seven Samurai, is about a village who hires hungry samurai to feed them, to protect them from their village. It was remade as The Magnificent Seven, and again as Bug's Life. You laugh, but I mean, like, Bug's Life is beat for beat Seven Samurai. It's just they hire circus bugs accidentally instead of samurai. They remade it again in Planet Sorgan in chapter 4 of The Mandalorian. And this time they kind of took it in a different direction, right? They actually gave it sort of that Japanese rice paddy feel that the visuals in Seven Samurai had. So it sort of had that visual identity with the village in Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai was probably Kurosawa's biggest film, which was actually kind of funny. Like, it'll play later in what we're going to talk about, but Kurosawa was sort of notoriously difficult as a filmmaker. Seven Samurai ran out of budget like 3 times, and Toho, who produced it, he ran out of budget the first time, and he said, hey, I need more time and budget, and they're like, okay, this is the last time we can do this, and they gave him more budget. And he ran out of budget and time again, and he's like, well, the film is 3/4 shot. I need more time and budget. What are you going to do? Like, you need to make your money back. Like, You can't not finish it. And they're like, oh, well, he's kind of got us backed against a wall on that one. He's right. We've got to finish it. And their investment in Seven Samurai definitely paid off. But he was just sort of like, I know what I'm worth. And that kind of bit him in the ass later. There was actually also some similarities in other thematic elements from Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai, the reason it's one of my favorite movies is that it's sort of every type of movie encapsulated under the roof of the one movie. So it has an action story, it has an adventure story, it has a coming-of-age story, it has tragedy, it has romance, it has drama. And the romance story between Katsuhiro and Monzo's daughter really kind of gets remade a little bit between the Mandalorian and the woman from Sorgan. And it has some really interesting thematic beats that it takes from there too. And this is kind of an example where George Lucas wasn't involved in the Mandalorian, but the filmmakers that came after George Lucas sort of know that Kurosawa is so ingrained in the DNA of what makes Star Wars, that if you go through and you take something from Kurosawa and figure out how to adapt it to Star Wars, it's going to feel like Star Wars sort of automatically. If you put that Star Wars skin on something that feels Kurosawa, it's going to work. And we'll talk about Yojimbo. So George Lucas cites Yojimbo as his second favorite Kurosawa film after Seven Samurai. Yojimbo is interesting in that it's pretty much a Western, right? There's even a samurai who walks around carrying a six-shooter. And one of George Lucas's primary influences was always John Ford, who was the great Western director who directed The Searchers, and Stagecoach. Stagecoach was a film made in 1939 with John Wayne. It's a film that Kurosawa cited as an incredibly heavy influence on him. Orson Welles cited it as a heavy influence on him as well. Orson Welles played it over and over and over again to his crew when he was making Citizen Kane. Welles and Kurosawa both kind of talked about how that was just how a well-made movie was. And Kurosawa took that influence from Ford, put it in his Japanese movies, and Lucas kind of took it back out and put it back into the Western elements of his Star Wars, but also moved it back out, took the John Ford as well, right? Like, how many of you are familiar with The Searchers? So The Searchers is about, John Wayne is sort of this really crappy dude who used to fight with the American Confederacy, and the indigenous folks steal his niece, and him and his nephew sort of go on this long trek to go find her and get her back. And John Wayne is on this hell-bent quest to go murder every Native American that they can in the camp to go bring her back. And it's pretty much beat for beat what happens to Shmi Skywalker. And you can watch side-by-sides of their raid on the Native American village and Anakin Skywalker's raid on the Tusken Raider camp. And it is exactly the same. So you see John Ford influencing George Lucas as much as John Ford's influencing Kurosawa. And Yojimbo is, I think, the most John Ford-inspired Kurosawa film because it's basically him going, how do I make a really cool American Western but samurai? And it was made, how many of you are familiar with A Fistful of Dollars, that whole trilogy? So that first movie, A Fistful of Dollars, is Sergio Leone was an Italian director who basically translated Kurosawa's script for Yojimbo, translated it into English, shot it in Italy, changed all of the samurai stuff to Western, and filmed it. Kurosawa watched it and sent Sergio Leone a note and said, Mr. Leone, this is a fine film, but it's my film, and then sued him. And Kurosawa made money off of a fistful of dollars for the rest of his life. Wow. That's how beat for beat it was. So Yojimbo has a lot of influences in Star Wars. One of the first is that Han Solo is very much in the mold of the Yojimbo character. He's sort of that guy you're not sure about, but by the end he has that heart of gold, because the Yojimbo, he's this devil-may-care sort of rogue, but by the end you realize he's playing both sides against each other, and he turns out to be a good guy and has saved everyone. Again, Toshiro Mifune is really the only person who could have played him so well. But also, Yojimbo has a different path to influencing Star Wars in a way that I don't think a lot of people realize. Yojimbo is sort of the reason we got Empire Strikes Back. So Yojimbo translates literally into English into the bodyguard. And Lawrence Kasdan, the screenwriter of Empire Strikes Back, was really, really in love with Yojimbo. And that's what caused him to write a script called The Bodyguard. Now, you're all going like, how in the world did The Bodyguard, which came out in the 90s, get us The Empire Strikes Back? Well, he wrote The Bodyguard in the 70s, and it was a huge script that Steve McQueen and I think like Tina Turner or Cher at different times were attached to. And it was just the hottest screenplay in Hollywood, and everybody was trying to get it made, but it never got made. And based on the strength and the word of mouth on this screenplay, he got a meeting with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And they decided to meet with him about Raiders of the Lost Ark. And they decided eventually that he would be the right person to write Raiders of the Lost Ark. So they had their story conferences with Lawrence Kasdan about Raiders, and he went off and he wrote it. And this was at the same time George Lucas was working with Lee Brackett, the science fiction writer who did the original draft of Empire Strikes Back. And she passed away. And they still needed a draft of Empire Strikes Back quickly. And Lawrence Kasdan finished his draft of Raiders of the Lost Ark and was scheduled to have a lunch meeting with George to turn in his draft. And at that lunch meeting, George, he slides over the script for Raiders across the table to George, and he said, I hope you're happy with this. And he's like, yeah, what do you think about writing The Empire Strikes Back? And he's like, well, why don't you read this first? And he's like, I'm sure it'll be fine. If it's not, you won't write Empire Strikes Back. But I'm sure it'll be fine. But yeah, let's talk about writing Empire Strikes Back. I need somebody who can work really well. So that was how Lawrence Kasdan got involved in Star Wars in the first place. And he went on to write Empire and Jedi and Force Awakens and Solo. And it was all because he had this love of Kurosawa and The Bodyguard, and that story. And he was like, what would happen if we set The Bodyguard, took that character, put him in America in the modern day and set him up with a pop star. And that's how we got The Bodyguard. And eventually he got The Bodyguard made, and he was a producer and a screenwriter on it in the 90s. And, it became the #1 selling movie soundtrack album in the world, which is probably the best thing you can say about it. It's fine, I guess, but it's not Empire, right? There's a lot of circuitous inspiration here too. So you've got, Yojimbo up on the top, right? And then you've got the Man with No Name and Angel Eyes here. And both of these characters were direct inspirations for Cad Bane. Cad Bane was a character who was very much, you can see their hats are identical and their coats are identical. And it was a character that George put in the Clone Wars because they were like, what if we did this? We'll basically just make Angel Eyes a Duros and put him in Clone Wars. the role of Cad Bane in Clone Wars was originally going to be Dirge from the Tartakovsky Clone Wars. And someone had shown George this design that was based on Angel Eyes, who was a character that was inspired by a movie that was a remake of Yojimbo, and he was like, oh, I really like that. I like that better. Let's toss Dirge out, and we'll put Cad Bane in there. And we got Cad Bane because of this, because Sergio Leone was inspired by Kurosawa, and one of the artists drew this, and we got Cad Bane because Toshiro Mifune is a badass, and Kurosawa cast him in everything for a long time. It's really interesting to me to see how all of these things just fit together, and how, we can still today see Kurosawa. Like, I look at this frame from Book of Boba Fett of Cad Bane and go like, there's so much Kurosawa in there, 4 layers removed, but it's there and it's undeniable. Kurosawa, by George Lucas, when he was making A New Hope, they were really trying to kill him. Like, the film was trying to kill him. He went to the hospital for exhaustion making it. He was a nobody in the film industry. Talking to Richard Leparmentier, who had been a friend of mine before, he passed away. He was Admiral Motti on the film, and he had told me stories about how during the UK unit, like, the crew would just they wanted to mutiny against him and take the film away from him. And there was always these meetings where it was just like, it's the kid's picture. Just let the kid finish the picture. No one really believed in him, and the film really wasn't, no one thought the film was going to be a hit or special or anything. But when Star Wars came out, he became like the Hollywood it kid. Like, he was on top of the world. And him and his friend Francis Ford Coppola, after Coppola by this time in the late 70s had directed back-to-back Best Picture winners with Godfather and Godfather Part 2, those two could really do no wrong. Kurosawa came out and visited George Lucas while he was making Empire. But at this time, when George Lucas was making The Empire Strikes Back, the last film Kurosawa had made was in 1975, which was Dersu Uzala, which was a co-production with Russia. Japanese studios wouldn't fund him because of those shenanigans, like with Seven Samurai, where he was just like, I'm an artist. I'm Kurosawa. I'll just kind of do what I want. And he was known for just doing what he wanted and spending money the way he wanted, and it didn't really matter, and no one would fund him. And Coppola and George Lucas are like, are you kidding me? Like, this man is an artist. Why is no one paying for his movies? This is a tragedy of the highest order. Like, this man makes beautiful art. We need to make sure he can make a movie. So George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola basically put their names up as collateral to get Kurosawa funding for a movie that he made called Kagemusha. So you'll notice on all the posters, especially the American posters, Kagemusha says presented by George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola. And basically that was them putting their money where their mouth was as far as their respect and admiration for Akira Kurosawa as an artist. Just like, we're putting our names and our reputations on the line to make sure that this man can continue making his masterpieces. Kagemusha was, I believe, Kurosawa's first color samurai film. And again, it delves into those ideas of doubles. It's about a daimyo in this war-torn feudal Japan that is killed. It's about this daimyo who's killed, but they can't let anyone else know, so his double has to step in. And unfortunately, his double steps in and has to keep this charade up for years and years and years. And when people discover that the double is there, there's sort of this tragedy there where it's just like, oh, well, the double's discovered, but he's led these years of having been the leader, but now, like, what does the realm owe him? what do they owe him now? And he's sort of like, does he still owe his loyalty to this place? And it's a very touching story, and it's very terrific. And you can see on the screen this picture of Irvin Kershner, because this was being produced at the same time as Empire Strikes Back. Irvin Kershner, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola all visiting the set with Kurosawa. And Kagemusha, it's a very important turning point in Kurosawa's later career, and it was really saved by George Lucas and Coppola. I don't think Kurosawa made a number of terrific films after this point, right? Like, I'm not sure we would have been able to get Ron or Madadayo or other films or Dreams after this point had Lucas and Coppola not staked their reputations on Kurosawa at this point. I could be wrong, but I think that was very brave of them to do, especially given his reputation. But that doesn't stop with Kagemusha. Kagemusha translates literally to Shadow Warrior, and of course George Lucas couldn't help himself and adapted sort of some of those fine points into an episode of Clone Wars. One of my favorites, where Jar Jar Binks is cast as the Shadow Warrior, where Boss Leone, who is the leader of the Gungans at this time in the Clone Wars, suffers a traumatic experience, and Jar Jar is a dead ringer for him and is forced to negotiate with the Separatists in order that they can distract them so that General Tarpals can take down General Grievous. And this is the episode where General Grievous dies. Or not General Grievous. General Grievous kills Captain Tarpals. And it's an excellent episode. But casting Jar Jar in that role felt very poignant to me, and it's a really terrific episode. George Lucas was really great about plunking different movies into 28 minutes. Like, how could I tell this really complex film, whether it's Kagemusha or Seven Samurai, into a 28-minute Clone Wars episode? One of my favorites, Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. Like, how do we do that in 28 minutes of the Clone Wars? But Shadow Warrior is a great episode for that. So if you watch Kagemusha and then the episode Shadow Warrior, you're going to see new things in the episode that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before. And it was a great doorway for me to show my kid Kagemusha afterward. Not immediately afterward. I mean, I think he was probably 12 or 13 when the episode came out, and he was probably 18 when I finally convinced him we should watch Kagemusha. But it was a very easy doorway to get him to watch more Kurosawa that way. Another one to talk about, actually, Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams talked a lot about their inspiration from High and Low on The Force Awakens. High and Low, Kurosawa isn't known just for his samurai movies. He was actually a terrific noir director. And his noir films really gave a very fascinating, tragic but beautiful look at post-war Tokyo. And again, this film stars Toshiro Mifune. And although the dilemma in the film doesn't have anything to do with how J.J. Abrams applied it to The Force Awakens, it's just a terrific film, and you should check it out, if nothing else, just to look at Kurosawa outside of the context of Jedi Geki films. But it's about this shoe magnate named Gondo, who he sort of worked at this shoe manufacturer his entire life, starting as a cobbler and moving his way up the corporate ladder. And he's finally saved up enough money to sort of buy a controlling interest in the company. And he's really disappointed in the company because they've been reducing the quality of the shoes. They've been cutting corners. They're going in the wrong direction, and he really believes in the quality of manufacturing and he wants to take this controlling interest to bring that back to the shoes. And as he's about to make this deal, he gets a call from a kidnapper that his son has been kidnapped. And he needs an amount of cash approximate to what he has been saving up. And as he's on the phone with the kidnapper, his son walks in the room. And he's very confused. And he kind of laughs at the kidnapper and hangs up on him. And the kidnapper's very confused because the kidnapper has a kid. And then his chauffeur, who has been a loyal servant of his for a very long time, comes in and says, I can't find my son. And his son and the chauffeur's son had been playing when the kidnapper had taken a kid. And so his moral dilemma is, I was ready to give all this money away when I thought he had my kid. Is my chauffeur's kid worth that money too? And he ends up handing the money over still and sort of ruining himself. And so the rest of the movie is about the police trying to recover the money back and hopefully in time for him to not ruin himself completely. And it's a really terrific film. And Abrams talked about the choreography of the scenes and the composition of how people move across the scenes. And there's this really terrific stillness to them, but also this really dynamic way that Kurosawa stages the scenes in this movie that J.J. Abrams talked about how he took that specifically from this movie to Force Awakens. When you watch them back to back, you can very much see where Abrams is taking the scene choreography and where he's placing people in the frame from Kurosawa. Which is not something I expected. When people asked, what sort of Kurosawa influences you used, I was not expecting High and Low to be high on that list from J.J. Abrams. Rashomon is another one that I think actually is one that I think if more people would have been, if more of the overly online folks were more familiar with Rashomon, they would have probably understood The Last Jedi more. Rashomon was probably Kurosawa's first international big breakout hit. It's a very short movie. It's about 90 minutes long, and it sort of tells the story of a murdering thief, a farmer, and his wife, and the events that unfold in a forest among the three of them. And it's told from 4 different perspectives, from the thief, the wife, the ghost of the farmer, and a monk that was witnessing the trial. And you see the same scene play out from each character's perspective. And each of them has different nuances based on the character you're seeing that point of view from. And they don't tell you which one is objectively true. You as the audience have to decide what you think is true based on adding up all the information and who you think is a more reliable narrator. And that was the technique Rian Johnson used as he told the story of Luke and Ben in the hut in The Last Jedi. That was something that he did where Luke kind of tells his very sanitized, I went in there, I checked on him, and he kind of turned on me, and there's no lightsabers involved. And then Ben tells his version, he had crazy Sith eyes, and he came at me, and his lightsaber was crazy, and it was all self-defense. I didn't do anything, I promise. And then Luke kind of gives the more neutral version at the end, and we see him ignite the saber, and the tears in his eyes, and the shock, and the somber, guilt on his face, and him lock eyes with Ben, and that innocent look on Ben's face, and then Ben sort of turn and attack him. And for my money, I think it's very much the third one where Luke is being very honest about what happened. But it's always interesting that the people who dislike The Last Jedi the most seem to believe only Kylo Ren's version, which says more about them than the movie. See, Like, you can see the two different versions. You know, Ben's version with the crazy eyes, and Luke's more honest version with the tears in his eyes. It's really interesting how Rian Johnson was able to, again, take that Kurosawa influence and add something new to Star Wars by going to a well of Kurosawa that we hadn't been to. Another one of my favorites was Stray Dog, another noir of Kurosawa's. This one is an early effort of his with Toshiro Mifune's and Kanbei Shimada's. Those two were teamed up quite a lot in Kurosawa's films, and they were a great pair. This is about another post-war sort of Tokyo story, and Toshiro Mifune is a very young cop who has his gun pickpocketed in the subway. And he happened to have been at the shooting range that morning, so he has the casings of his gun, so he knows exactly what the marks on his bullets look like, and he's able to track the murders that are being caused with his gun. So he's taking this very personally as he's tracking his gun down, with the help of a sort of a grizzled old veteran that's helping him try to track down his gun, who's this expert on the underworld. And this got remade in Clone Wars in an episode called Lightsaber Lost, and we even got the Clone Wars equivalent of Takashi Shimura with Tara Sanube. Again, not an accident that they look very much alike, right? And Tara Sanube's character is very much that expert in the Clone Wars and the the expert in the criminal underworld on Coruscant, and that's why he gets assigned to help Ahsoka find her lightsaber. It's really amazing that George Lucas and Dave Filoni found a way to cram the essence of a Kurosawa masterpiece into like a 25-minute kids show. And have it mean something, and teach a lesson to Ahsoka and us. I was heartbroken when I saw Tara Sanube on Obi-Wan Kenobi. You remember that? If you don't, like, when Obi-Wan Kenobi is in the Fortress Inquisitorius and he walks through the mausoleum, he's one of the dead Jedi in the canisters, and I was just heartbroken because he was such a cool Jedi. Especially because he was basically Takashi Shimura, who's just one of my favorite character actors. He was also in Godzilla, if you remember him from Godzilla. But all of his best movies were Kurosawa films. Visions, obviously, is another huge, like, they take a lot of inspiration from Kurosawa in Visions. And you can see that pretty directly in the duel. Yojimbo is very much a one-for-one of the duel in Yojimbo are pretty much a one-for-one. You can see a lot of the shot choices and the way the character is designed and the way it works, and even the way the black and white works with it. The shopkeeper who's sort of like, or the restaurateur, he's cast as a Sullustan. And that design choice of the way the guy who owns the restaurant in Yojimbo kind of has that frown constantly, the way he cast him in the duel as sort of a Sullustan who's sort of balding at the sides, kind of keeps that design aesthetic. It works very well. The Acolyte is really interesting because it combines a lot of these sort of most recently. So the Acolyte, if you look at it from the top down, it combines Rashomon, right, where we have May and Osha's both of their competing views of what happened on the planet before, about what the Jedi did and what their mother did, and who died and who didn't. So we have both of those episodes that give us a view of what happened that night. So we get that feeling of Rashomon based on their points of view of what happened. We also have some of that Seven Samurai vibe, right? Like Kelnaka straight up has like the Seven Samurai sort of top knot hair. We have all of the samurai sort of gathering as Jedi here. They have that same vibe as they're attacking. And actually in Yojimbo, one thing you'll notice in Yojimbo is the way Kurosawa actually uses weather in a way that most directors really didn't, because it was more difficult, right? Especially back in the 50s and the 60s, where if you wanted to use the wind as a character, you had to get giant fans. You couldn't just do CGI later. And so he would go out and film on these really dusty streets and really long shots, and in order to do it in a really long shot, you had to get a really giant fan to keep it out of frame, and he would blow the wind in on people, and so you'd get these really big flares of dust because he wanted the wind flaring and the flags flapping and their robes moving. And if you look at some of the duels in Yojimbo, you'll notice the wind pick up as the emotion heightens. And if you watch the first duel between Mei and Master Saul in Yojimbo, it's interesting that Leslie Headland actually uses this as a personification of the Force, where she uses the dust as a character, where when Master Saul is using the Force, there's not a lot of dust, but the uncontrolled, unrestrained use of the Force that Mei is using picks up all of that dust, and it makes it look visually very much like Yojimbo on those dusty, sort of old school, sort of Kurosawa set looking streets with those dusty roads, picks up all of that dust and gives it that visual flair like Kurosawa did, and they're controlling that on a story level the same way Kurosawa did in Yojimbo. And so Leslie Headland is using a lot of different elements of Kurosawa and blending them together in a way, from this global perspective, in a way a lot of the other projects hadn't blended them as well so far. So we've got like 5 minutes or so left. That's the end of my presentation. I put together a whole lot of other slides, and I was like, I'm going to talk breathlessly for an hour, and I didn't think I was going to have time for much more, so I want to give you guys time to ask some questions or whatever, or we could call it, or whatever you guys want to do. So if you've got questions, I'm happy to answer some. Let's go with this one and then that one over there. Yes?
I'm just curious, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, and this is your opinion.
Yes.
Directors, creators that are currently inspired by Kurosawa, or inspired to be more Star Warsy and look to Kurosawa. You know what I'm saying? Is it an innate draw to him, and that's what they pull in, or I want to be really Star Warsy? I know George Lucas,
So the question is, for anybody who didn't hear it, is it a chicken or the egg? Are people drawn to Kurosawa, or are they drawn to, I want to be more Star Warsy? I know he studied Kurosawa, so I'm going to go study Kurosawa. I don't think there's any wrong road to Kurosawa. So I think right now at this point in time, there's no escaping the influence of Star Wars, and the way Kurosawa is marketed so much as this was a pathway to Star Wars, I think it's almost impossible to divorce those two. So it's not even a chicken or the egg. It's sort of like they're married now at this point, if that makes sense. It's the same way where, like, if you talk to visual effects folks now, if you talk to guys like Phil Tippett, it was always like, it's the Ray Harryhausen stuff that made me want to be a special effects guy. And if you talk to guys that are like John Knoll's age, it was Star Wars, right? And so there's going to be those like watershed moments, and I think Star Wars has sort of like soaked up all that oxygen in the same way that like it did for VFX guys. You know what I mean?
Thanks for your perspective.
Yes.
I've never seen Kurosawa films, but as someone who has a lot, what would you recommend for getting into watching, not necessarily Star Wars related ones, but just favorites?
Recommending Kurosawa films for someone who hasn't seen them before. Seven Samurai is always a safe bet. Seven Samurai is just like really great. If a 4-hour movie is too intimidating, there's an intermission. Watch it over 2 nights. Stop at the intermission, and if you feel like you can't wait to see what happens next, just power through. Rashomon's an easy one because it's only 90 minutes. Hidden Fortress is a good one to go into. So like those are like if you've only got 90 minutes, Rashomon's the way to go. If you want to have a fun time at like 2.5 hours, Hidden Fortress is great, but Seven Samurai is like the one. In the back, yes.
I want to know the difference between drawing inspiration and stealing because obviously Kurosawa was not so much inspiration from Kurosawa, yet Fistful of Dollars was soon and Kurosawa won. So obviously there is a key difference.
Yeah,
it's very murky.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about
So,
how to avoid, how to pay tribute and for the great masters yet without breaking the law?
Yeah, so the difference between inspiration and stealing. So with Fistful of Dollars, he literally just, like, where George Lucas started with Hidden Fortress, where he took the opening, synopsis and just scratched out all the names and wrote Star Wars names in there, if he would have just done that, that would have just been stealing. But he iterated and said, no, I want more Flash Gordon here. I want more John Ford here. And he just kept throwing different inspirations at it until it was unrecognizable as just Kurosawa. With Sergio Leone, with Fistful of Dollars, he basically just transcribed the script, scratched out Samurai Sword, wrote 6-shooter, scratched out the name of this gangster and wrote Rojo, and gave them Mexican names. And scratched out, this Japanese word and wrote that Mexican word, and scratched out this Japanese word and wrote that English word, and that was it, right? And all he did was take the exact same script and transplanted it into a different setting without changing anything or asking permission, right? The Magnificent Seven did the exact same thing, except they went to Toho and said, can we license this? And they paid them for it, right? So there's a difference between doing a legitimate remake and asking permission. There's a difference between stealing and George Lucas saying, I want to take a little bit of this, and I want to take a little bit of this, and I want to take a little bit of this, and I want to take a little bit of that, and then I want to put them in a blender and do that, right? So like if I'm inspired to say, it was really interesting how he told this story from these two characters' perspective, and they wanted to go this way, and I did that, but then I took this Flash Gordon aesthetic, and then I took this stuff I did in THX 1138 here, and I added it onto the top of this, and then I put a spaceship here, and then there's this Death Star thing. You know what I mean? So it's just he kept taking ideas from so many different places that it was unrecognizable to all of that, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Okay. Right here, and then we'll go across.
I have a question, but to follow up what you said, he also recognized that. He recognized, and he said, so I'm influenced by that. I am in awe of this. He didn't shy away from it, saying like, oh, this is all me.
Yeah, no, he recognized it, he acknowledged it, and I think he paid it forward, right? Like he paid it forward to Kurosawa, and as much as he possibly could, to the point where he put his name on the line to get him back working. We've got time for like 2 more quick ones.
Very quick. So there is an episode of Ahsoka called Shadow Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Any relationship with that and Kagemusha?
Yeah, I think there is some of that too, because I think Shadow Warrior was the episode.
Anakin and
that's the
Ahsoka.
Anakin one. Yeah. I think that one was more about the duality of Anakin, right? That one was very much about Anakin struggling with that inside himself. But I think that was also Filoni sort of being cheeky with some of that. Yeah.
And would you say that The Mandalorian has Kurosawa influence, or is it influenced by other media?
I mean, Mandalorian does have some, like we talked about Chapter 4, but I think if the Mandalorian has one primary influence more than any others, you'd have to look at Lone Wolf and Cub. And in fact, I've done articles that go through like Lone Wolf and Cub, especially like the first 3 films, and some of the manga, right? Like the shots of Luke giving Grogu the choice between the armor and the lightsaber is very much the choice that the Lone Wolf gives his cub at the beginning of his journey, right? Where it's like, you're going to take the sword or the ball. You know, and if you pick the sword, you're coming with me. If you pick the ball, I'm going to kill you. Right? Like and like the shots are 1 for 1 out of the anime, or out of the manga. Okay, I think last question, we're out of time, but I will say, if you want to ask me more questions, I've got postcards with my email address and stuff in them, and I'm more than happy to talk to you. And I do a podcast called Full of Sith, if you want to listen to me yak like this more.
Yeah, we were just wondering, how do you think the casting of Mifune would have changed A New Hope?
So it would have changed A New Hope significantly, because George Lucas also said that if he would have cast Mifune, there was a black actor he was going to cast as Han Solo. So he was going to cast a black actor as Han Solo if Mifune would have accepted the part. I think we'd be living in a much different Star Wars landscape.
Do you think the fight scenes between Obi-Wan and Vader would have been more intense or action-oriented?
No, I think they would have been the same, because would have had the same fight choreographer. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming and staying. Yeah, this was such a great experience. It was so fun to be able to do, and I was really nervous about it. I was worried about being like the dude from Japan the dude from America who showed up from Japan to tell people about Kurosawa, as though they didn't already know. But it turned out really well, and I was surprised by the reaction. In fact, there was one gentleman who stopped me in the street afterward, like a week later in Ueno, right outside of Ueno Park, who like stopped to take a picture of me with me, because he was so impressed by the presentation, and I was really kind of shocked by that anybody recognized me afterwards. It was really interesting, but had a lot of fun doing it. Wish Adam Christopher could have joined me. He would have been a great addition to it, but could have done so much more with it if I'd have been given more time on the schedule. But obviously you don't want those things to go longer than an hour. There's so much to see and do at Star Wars Celebration. Maybe I could do another version of it at a future celebration, maybe LA 2027. There'll be reason for me to do more stuff like this. But in the meantime, for me, you can visit me at swankmatron.com, or find me on social media at swankmatron, wherever it is you do social media, particularly on Blue Sky is where I'm at a lot. As far as Full of Sith, you can listen to the entire back catalog of episodes at fullofsith.com. And that's really where, you can do a lot of interaction with us. You can send us emails at holocron@fullofsith.com. And starting next week, we'll be back into doing email responses regularly. We've just been traveling so much, so we'll be doing that again. And be sure to rate and review us wherever it is you listen to the show. So for super producer Mike Pilot, for my co-host Holly Fry, I'm Bryan Young, and the Force will be with you always.
Sir, if you'll not be meeting me, I'll close down for a while.